Wow, new music and everything. I tell you, you got to look out for us, Tony. This new production we have, I tell you.
Jeez, I tell you what, man, if Bittner did that, man, it's like, is that Slayer Light? Is that what that was? I was
I think
digging it.
Bittner got that straight from the Muzak version of Nickelback. But
isn't the Muzak version of Nickelback?
it might be, but hopefully Bittner's not watching this at this point, so give us a hard time. But for those tuning on in, this is your Super Region 3 playoff podcast. That's a just rings right off the tongue. Boom. You guys, if you thought that you were tuning in for that and you were a day early, it's actually, we fooled you. We're doing GLIAC Weekly again. But no, Tony and I are here to go ahead and break down Super Region 3. Obviously, I've covered the Northern Sun for a long time. Tony has covered the GLIAC for a long time. And we also, I've gone ahead and know about plenty of the teams in the GLVC, and Tony knows about plenty of the teams in the GMAC. So we've got a little bit of overflow here, with regard to what we've covered in the past. So Tony, I don't think that this is going to be a heavy lift for us, and we can go ahead and kind of break down the field that we've got here, and we're going to go and do a team profile for every team here out of the 8, and we'll go ahead and take your comments and go ahead and speak with you a little bit and engage. And that's kind of what we're looking at for this next hour.
We'll do our best,
won't we? So let's go ahead and we're going to pull up the bracket itself. And we've got, as we go ahead and look to unpack some of this here, no surprise, Ferris State is the number 1 seed. Number 2, Findlay. 3, UIndy. 4, and Ashland. And Tony, I think that we kind of expected that this wasn't likely to change, and it didn't. And Findlay has a setback, and they didn't go ahead and move at all because they were already in a really good spot with where they were a week ago.
For sure. And we talked about this, on the last couple of shows, that if they had won last week, they would have had a case to potentially be on the 1 line. I don't know whether it would have happened or not, but again, the case would have been there and it would have been valid.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, and for those who were kind of asking here if there was a delay with us getting we actually decided that we were going to go ahead and start at 7:30, but then we said, you know what, we'll get a little bit closer. No, there are times where the software that we're using sometimes doesn't behave all that well when we go ahead and try and make sure all our audio and video is good. So sometimes we have a slight delay. So it's a fair question. But then we kind of move on, Tony, to the next group of teams. And Judder's got a question here about still trying to understand why Duluth is seated behind Ashland has to travel. Well, I'll give you the answer to that. Strength of schedule.
Yep.
So, when we're taking a look here at the teams, and Ashland has a strength of schedule that's very high. You're going to be able to go ahead and see that they also had, I think that they had 5 wins over teams that were 500 or better. And that contributes to their KPI being, I want to say, about 50 points higher. It was, Tony, something like that. So you start to add those things up, and Duluth had only 1 loss, no doubt about it.
Yep.
And but at the same time, despite me being the Northern Sun guy, I have to be very candid about how we got here. And if they don't have the KPI, which is really what's driving the field, then you're not going to host. It's that straightforward, Tony.
Yeah, no, and we've talked about this a lot over the years. I mean, obviously the KPI influence on the selection process is something that's, I don't want to call it new, but it's new, right? I mean, we've really only started to see that become a viable and usable metric over the last handful of seasons. Traditionally it was, okay, how many wins did you have? What's your in-region win percentage? Your opponent's, your strength of schedule, your opponent's strength of schedule, all that kind of fun stuff. And that tended to be, one of the more of where things were centered. And so what I think the KPI is intended to do is to try and say, okay, let's take all those metrics and maybe kind of come up with a way to meld them into a single way to look at what your resume produces.
Yeah, like one composite number, right?
Yeah, and it maybe also can kind of give you some bonus for beating good teams, maybe even on the road. And if you lose a close one to a better team, maybe it doesn't hurt you so much. One of the things though I think is valid, and I think it still is something that the committee kind of needs to figure out is, when you lose, when you see teams that it takes. I'm trying to think of how to characterize this. There are teams sometimes where you look at their resume and they don't have as many quality wins. So great example. Ashland's got 5 wins over teams that are 500 or better. And maybe Duluth doesn't have as many, but okay, they didn't play as many. And then who did they lose to? And there are times where we've seen teams, sometimes it takes the really, really good teams are the only ones who can beat you. But then you beat the teams you're supposed to, but you don't get that quality win and it keeps you out. So that's one of the things that over time, I think KPI, if they can dial it in, might help with that. But it does seem like it's just another way that, they're trying to run certain criteria more than once. And I don't know if there's ever going to be a right answer for it.
Well, and Tony, I'm getting word from coaches that I speak with that this, what is it, MPI or whatever it's called, is going to be, there's kind of a newer version of KPI that's being utilized for Division III right now.
Oh, okay.
Where they're just strictly using numbers and there's no committee. Well, if you guys think that people are up in arms now, just wait.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that there are times where if the committee sees something that seems to be too obvious to pass up, that there will be some type of, that doesn't pass the smell test type of thing. And I'd like to think that that'll happen. I mean, they have 8 people in the room in each super region to do that. Not to mention, the 8 people on the national. So just some thoughts I had off the top. Now, can I disagree that Duluth head to head, I mean, they're ranked higher in our poll for a reason. It's not just because they have 1 loss. I think there's just an overall thought by a lot of people that they should be ranked higher, and then certainly they should be hosting. I can't disagree from the common sense standpoint.
Yeah.
If we look at it that way, but when we know that the criteria that's being utilized is heavy KPI, then this is what it is, and there's not really a lot in the way of surprise because we saw this coming 2 weeks ago.
Absolutely. And I guess the other thing to keep in mind too is everybody knew what the rules were when the season started. So it's not like anybody's caught with their, unaware, like, geez, oh, Pete's, what does this all mean? Every coaching staff and every administration from all these schools knew what it was going in. So, hey, you got to win more ball games if you want to have control of over where you're going to sit. I mean, and I think that's what it comes down to. But do I think there's a viable case for Duluth to have potentially hosted? Sure. But again, I mean, sure. I think the numbers bore out, and we were kind of on the fact that they were likely going to have to travel, I think, a couple weeks ago. So to have that end up shaking out that way wasn't a surprise to any of us. That's for sure. Yeah.
And I don't think on a night like this, we're going to adjudicate the selection criteria per se.
Nope.
And that's somebody else. I mean, we're going to go ahead and look at the field that we have, and we're going to talk about the matchups that we have primarily, and kind of go from there. So
and ultimately, Duluth got their chance to prove it on the field. So
yeah, I mean, and selfishly, Tony, the Northern Sun guy in me says, at least we don't have Mankato and Duluth playing each other again in round 1, which has felt like that's been, second verse same as the first for a while.
Yeah. And I'm with you, and I'm glad for that, but I'm still disappointed that there's a GLVC rematch in here, and it still seems like they could have figured out a way to avoid that. So, but again, you know, we're not going to solve for that or any of the other world's ills here within the context of this nifty little podcast thing. So,
no doubt. And by the way, for those tuning on in who are, there was a question asked right when we got on about when the other podcasts are. Just to have full transparency, we will have the Super Region 4 podcast at 8:30 Central Time, so in about 70 minutes, and then Chuck and I believe Justin are heading up or facilitating the SR2 podcast tomorrow evening, and then we also have the SR1 podcast that will be occurring. And I know Chuck and Ferg are working on that with CIAA and PSAC on Thursday evening. So I don't have the exact details and times, but you guys know roughly when we come on. So I'm sure that Chuck will go ahead and post that on our socials as well. So, but Tony, as we go ahead and we kind of look at the rest of the list, we then have Truman and Indy, like you mentioned. I thought we could have figured out a way not to have that. When I was watching the unveiling, I was doing one of these deals, like did we think this through at all?
Yeah.
But you know what? It is what it is, and Indy will take a home game after some of the tough scheduling they've had on the road in the last few years.
Yeah.
And Truman State is just thrilled to be in the field. Let's be honest. They edged out Upper Iowa.
It's a good step for them. Yes.
Yeah. So, then as we go ahead and we take a look, Mankato is going to go ahead and play at Findlay. Mankato. I mean, honestly, they'll say it. They backed into this just like they did a year ago.
Yep.
But at the same time, last year they went on a run.
They went
and
deep.
Finished in the Final Four. So, we'll talk a little bit later before we do our picks at, kind of some of the teams that may have been at the doorstep and what that picture looked like a little bit. And then we'll go from there. I know we've got a question here that popped on up. Witt, how could UMD be ranked 7th in Division II poll and ranked 5th? I'm assuming you probably haven't been following this up until this point, and I'm going to say this the nicest way I can. The polls have absolutely nothing to do. It's public opinion, or our voters per se, and the coaches. Those are polls. So this is not at all, kind of head-to-head the same thing. The criteria that's utilized, the KPI, is a whole separate beast. So, the polls, if we're going to be honest, Tony, a team's reputation of the past is going to play into polls. There's no way around that.
Sure.
And this moves away from that, for better or worse.
Yep.
So, that's where we won't even that's the last time we'll discuss polls probably on this show, is because they're really not going to have any bearing on where the teams landed.
Correct. And I think the other thing to keep in mind too is this kind of helps prove that guy's point. But I mean, he's looking at Duluth as being on the 5 line. We don't actually know where they wound up. I mean, we can kind of theorize, but technically, once you're not seated in the top 4, you basically go into a bucket. So they're basically playing the de facto 5 line, but that doesn't mean that that's even where the committee saw them. They could have seen them as 6 or 7, as far as we know. I doubt it at 10-1, but it's plausible.
Yes. One more reason, Tony, that we need to find our way on the committee. But anyway,
fair enough.
Let's go ahead and start looking at some team profiles here. And we're going to start off with, the clear-cut number 1, Ferris State. And Tony, as you and I, we've covered them quite a bit and talked about them throughout the year on the GLIAC show. And, they are, if you look at them on paper and you take a look at what they've done in the recent past, they are a clear-cut number 1 coming into this, and there's no doubt about it. And you don't need to look much further, Tony, than some of their numbers here. And we're going to highlight on the different slides in a slightly, different color about what really jumps off the page.
Sure.
And Tony, I'm going to let you go ahead and talk a little bit about some of what we're seeing here when we look at the numbers with Ferris. But I think the one that for me jumped off the page, they're leading the country in scoring, and it's really not that close.
Sure. And that's kind of something that we've become quite accustomed to, with Ferris State, is they're going to score a lot of points. Now, when you see a team that tends to be that explosive and can score in bunches like that, again, we've had this conversation on our various shows for a lot of the last few years. You think that they're going to be pretty pass happy. And when you look at 291 yards a game rushing, you realize very quickly, hey, this is a run first ball club. But the way they approach the run game is very unique. It is somewhat option based. They do a ton of motions. They do a ton of different ways to get different ball carriers the ball. They don't have a bell cow running back. They were starting to lean towards maybe having somebody who could kind of fill that role in Zach Ahern as the season was progressing.
Right.
He got dinged up a few weeks ago and is going to miss the rest of the season, it looks like. But if you even just look back over the last stretch of years when they've, won the 3 out of the last 4 national championships, they've really never had that bell cow back. It's always going to be, how do we get this slot guy, this boundary receiver, this guy who lines up in the backfield, this quarterback, this H-back. How do we get these guys the ball? And that's one of the things that makes them so enormously difficult to defend, is you just never know who's going to get the ball. And one of the things that they're always looking for are a couple of different things. Number one, how do I get the ball to guys who are just better athletes than you have in space? And two, if I can facilitate doing that with, I have more guys blocking over here than you have guys for us to block, and so I've got numbers. That's the other thing that they're going to look to do, and they are incredibly good at it. And that's how you score almost 53 points a game in the GLIAC and playing some of the tough out of conference competition they did in like Pitt State, Tiffin. They had some pretty good out of conference games. So this is a team that I guarantee you, Northwood, in this first round is going to realize real quickly that they don't see offenses like this week in and week out. Again, it's not a GMAT criticism. It's just most teams don't see this. They are very difficult to prepare for. They almost have a certain Harding-esque kind of feel to them in terms of how do you prepare for that offense? You really can't, because again, the concepts they use are one thing. The other thing is they've just got better athletes than you do at a lot of spaces, and that's part of why we have Tariq Brett there, because that's a guy this year who has had multiple games where he may only touch the ball 6 or 8 times, and yet you see him in the end zone 3 or 4 of those. That's how explosive they are, and they got more guys than just he that can do that kind of stuff to you.
That's one thing that I notice whenever I watch them, is they play at a different game speed than most Division II teams, almost all, frankly. Yep. We see some teams in the Gulf South who can play that way, but the way that they do it in such a way where it's not messy with the way they do things, and you watch the way that they can run their version of kind of the speed options stuff, some triple aspects.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden they can stop and pop and hit a guy going down the seam. And then they get the ball to Tariq Brett in open space. And it's just so, I can't even imagine trying to prepare for them on a week like this.
Sure.
Especially if you've never played them, if this isn't something that you're playing every few years where you've prepared for them, this is a real big ask. And on the other side, Tony, I think that something people forget about at times, kind of like with Harding, is how good the defense is. Now, they've been leaky at points in the first half of football games the last few weeks, but it seems like the run defense is still putting up a pretty good, year when we look at this, and teams are averaging under 300 yards a game. Tony, I'm not sure if I fully buy into if this defense is going to continue to be kind of suspect in the first half of games like they've been recently. I have a feeling that now that they're in the playoffs, I think that this is going to be a much more alert and focused group. Do you feel the same?
I do, and you've said a lot there that I kind of want to make sure we unpack a few different pieces of it. So
Yeah.
to kind of put a bow on their offense, I think the other thing that we didn't really cover is, yeah, they do all those different types of conceptual things, and yes, they have all those athletes and all that speed, and it has that Gulf South feel from that regard. The other thing that you can't overlook is the level of physicality that offense plays with on every down. And that's part of why they run the ball so effectively is they've got an offensive line group and the way and style that they play. That is, I doubt that there's a team that's going to walk in there and say, okay, our defensive front's as big as their offensive line. You just don't see it.
Sure.
They are always bigger than you. And they are extremely athletic, and they do a real good job with how they block up their different scheme things. And so that's the other thing that you'll see is it's amazing how often, especially on quarterback runs, it seems like where you just like they just have gaping holes to run through, and sometimes different alleys they can pick based on where the play is flowing. So that's one thing that everybody that plays them that's not used to seeing them is going to be in for a treat when it comes to that. Right. Northwood used to get to see him every year, but I don't know how much of this coaching staff was around the last time that the Northwood was still in the GLIAC. So we'll see what they're able to do on Saturday. We'll talk more about that later. Now, as far as the defense goes, I agree with you that traditionally you see Ferris play their best defense once playoff time rolls around. I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of shift to that idea as we get into this year's playoffs. Now, we talked as the season was wearing on, that they are missing a few guys. They've had a few key guys like Al Siapia, Jalen Jones. They haven't seen a lot of those guys over the last stretch of weeks. And I don't know if any of them are going to be able to be available. So you've got some youth at a few spots. And the leakiness is a valid concern, and it's a valid thing that you bring up. I mean, they had that stretch earlier this year where they shut 3 opponents out in a row, and yet you look at the last 4 weeks, they've been giving up 32 points a game, and that's just in regulation. You add the overtime points that Saginaw scored, that number creeps up even a little bit more. The other thing I would point out is over the last 3 weeks, all 3 of those opponents have rushed for more than 200 yards against this defense. And so if they are just kind of, I use the phrase playing with their food a little bit, they probably need to, make sure the napkin's neatly folded on their lap and put the knife and fork on the right spot and then actually do some real work there, because a team that might be able to come in and find a way to establish a good ground game and keep that Ferris offense on the sidelines, a game like that could end up being tighter and longer than Ferris wants. And the other piece of this that we have to always keep in mind is Ferris plays with a very risk-tolerant style. It's not sloppy. It's about execution. But when you pitch the ball as much as they do, the ball ends up on the deck sometimes.
Yep.
And when you're playing with those kinds of athletes that are moving, when you're moving that fast, if you take a good hit, sometimes the ball pops out. So that's one thing that Ferris does more than most elite teams is they fumble a lot. And so if that sort of trend continues, which we've seen that over these last handful of games, that they've been a little bit more turnover prone, okay, it's gonna potentially keep some folks in games. So I think that's going to be the real key thing that I look for. And again, we'll talk about that when we preview the first round game. But that's what I want to see from Ferris here is, okay, do they kind of dial it in and button things up and play with a little more focus? The game that they played probably with the most focus this year was Grand Valley. They had, I think, their fewest penalties. I don't know that they ever fumbled once. They didn't turn the ball over once, and they were highly efficient on offense. So usually the better opponents are when they tend to really get things going and they dial it up.
Yeah, I almost feel like at the end of this year, not that they're lacking motivation, but I mean, it felt like they were kind of playing things out a little bit at the end, and they already knew what their lot was probably going to be in the playoffs and so forth. At some point, a team that is this high performing just kind of needs to get to the playoffs.
Yeah.
And we'll see how that works, but all of those teams that they're playing are extremely familiar with them.
Yes.
And the team that they're going to be playing is not.
Yep.
So moving on to our next team, we've got the Findlay Oilers, and this is a club, Tony, when I'm going to have you go ahead and do a little bit of breakdown, but some interesting things when you look at the numbers. We've talked about that offensively, they are, how would I best say it? Not prolific.
Fair.
But at the same time, stylistically, they are trying to play very much of a physical style of game where they go ahead and play strong defense, run the football effectively, and are probably more of a low risk style of football, if I'm going to be candid, because they average 25 a game.
Yep.
But the thing that really stood out to me, rushing defense, they allow 57 yards a game. Yeah. Now, I'm not going to say that the GMAC is necessarily the top conference in Division II. And so, there's maybe some adjustment to be made for that number versus how they would do in the playoffs.
Sure.
But at the same time, they've played Ashland, they've played Tiffin, and they played Northwood. So, but and those aren't, a lot of those teams aren't really prolific offensively either, outside of maybe Tiffin has shown me some things.
Yeah,
but it still feels like this is a style of football that can do well come playoff time. And how do you see them when you look at the numbers here and kind of their season?
Yeah, and I think, when you look at that 12.2, it's actually all the more impressive when you look at the fact that they gave up a 35
Absolutely.
spot to UIndy to open the season, right? So now, again, we've talked, we've mentioned it a few different times that, this year is actually going to be very interesting for us to watch how these GMAC teams perform. Getting 3 teams in, I don't know that any of us were thinking that with the readjusting of the regions that the GMAC would get 3 teams in this year. And to be frank, I don't think a lot of us saw 9-2 coming out of Northwood this year. That's not to disrespect the Timberwolves, but that's just, they hadn't, they were kind of pushing their way up to that 500 range over the last couple of seasons. They've definitely been trending correctly, to go out and then, find a way to get 9 of them this year. Again, I don't know that a lot of us had that figured out, but my point with all that is this is going to be really interesting to see how they fare against those conferences, Northern Sun in particular, as well as the GLIAC, where the noted physicality of the week in, week out has just been kind of an accepted edict over the last stretch of years. So has the GMAC converted to something of more of that style? And Findlay embodies that as well as anybody. So we're going to learn a lot about that, when they come into this season. But again, to give up 12 points a game after giving up 30 some in your first game is really impressive. That means they pitched a lot of low count games. Jaden Farmer, we got pictured there. He's just kind of that bruising physical back. Right. If you get into 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3, you're going to have a hard time getting Findlay off the field. That's what they want. So they can give it to him and he can just plow forward. He's a 4.7 yard a carry guy. So it's not like he doesn't consistently grind out yardage on you, but the number of explosives that they have with him is not overwhelming. And they do have a pretty balanced attack too, in terms of, he led the team in rushing. I think he only had a little over 800 yards on the season. Right. So, they are going to throw the ball a little bit with Chase Harrison, but they want to do it very selectively and when it makes sense. And of course they want to do it off of play action. So everything for Findlay really does, revolve around how well can they handle things in the trenches, both offensively and defensively. Obviously, the offensive line has been sufficient enough that they've been able to be one of the GMAC leaders in terms of first downs, 3rd down conversions, all that kind of stuff to keep the ball for long periods of time. And the defense doesn't let you run the football. So once they start making you one-dimensional, it becomes real hard to beat teams when defensively they know what you're trying to do. And so that's kind of been the recipe that Findlay's been able to use all year.
Yeah, and what's interesting is when we go ahead and we take a look at the 3 GMAC teams that are in here, these are the 3 lowest outputs offensively in the group of 8. At the same time, defensively, it's kind of the flip. Because of the fact that they're giving up low numbers.
Yep.
Now, obviously, they gave up a fairly good number to Indy, but were at the same time they were able to outscore Indy too.
Yeah.
So these are not teams that are just kind of playing in a silo. They've gone ahead and gotten out of that, and we'll see a little bit more of that here as we move through the group. But The next team up, Tony, is UIndy. Now, UIndy, obviously, out of the GLVC, has a different look to them than this group that we've just been speaking of a moment ago. And Tony, it's real easy to see that by total offense. They're averaging over 500 yards per game. That's a real short list of teams in Division II who are I think they're third nationally, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So, I mean, that says a whole lot about Gavin Sukup and company. What other things do you see here with Indy that are real noteworthy?
Well, I think the thing that I like about this offense is they're very multiple because, I mean, you know, when you see a guy like Gavin Sukup and you see that they're throwing for 322 a game, it's amazing how often when you look at their highlights and you look at their box scores, how many games Sukup, he may throw for 4 bills one week and only $1.89 the next, right? And so they do real well with taking what the defense gives them and being very persistent in exploiting that throughout the game to be able to get what they want out of that specific matchup. And I think the other thing that gets overlooked a little bit too is Sukup is actually a very adept runner. And so, you know, they do some stuff that obviously out of design for him. But if you don't contain him or he doesn't see what he likes in the pass game, he'll pull it down and he'll burn you with his legs. So this is a guy who's, I think he's a 4-year starter. I mean, it doesn't seem like we've been talking about him for about, 18 years or something like that. So when you have a guy who's that experienced and knows the offense that well and knows how to leverage his tools and read defenses extremely well, hey, man, if he has a good game, anybody that faces this team in this bracket is going to have a rough go.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we go ahead and we look at this club, and I think there's been some level of dismissal with them in the past, Tony, because they're always matched up in the playoffs with what we would consider to be a fire-breathing dragon. You know, they're getting a Grand Valley, they're getting Pitt State 2 years in a row, if my memory serves me right.
Right.
Those are matchups that not very many D2 teams are going to have any real success with. Let's be honest. And I'm happy for Indy to get a home playoff game. Now it's up for them to do something with it here. But, I think that this is a ball club that, with this being Sukup's last season and everything else, he's got some nice weapons as receivers. This feels like a good spot this time around for the Greyhounds.
Well, and some things that I'm, just hearing through back channels and whatever else, Tony knows a few people, right? Is I think the Greyhounds feel like this is the most prepared for the rigors of the playoff that they've had with a team in quite a while. I think they feel like this offensive line's taken a step forward, but I also think that they think that their defense is a lot better than what it has been. And anytime you finish a season, I don't care who you're playing, if you can hold teams under 100 yards a game for a whole season, you're doing some real work there defensively. So I think this might be Indianapolis's best team in a while. And so they get to open up, not necessarily having to play a team that has that playoff pedigree. And like even last year, I mean, they opened against the Grand Valley team, and last year's Grand Valley team offensively wasn't elite, but that was a really good defense. And Indianapolis struggled all day. I mean, I think they only crossed Grand Valley's 40 once in that game, if my memory serves. I don't think they're going to have similar issues this year, especially opening up with somebody that they know so well, that they know how to exploit.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's a separate issue of having to beat the same team twice in 1 year, a playoff caliber squad.
Yep.
But, we'll get to that a little bit later when we go ahead and break that game down. Moving to the next squad up, we have got the Ashland Eagles, and Ashland right here as a 9-2 ball club. Frankly, played a pretty strong schedule, Tony.
Yeah.
They beat IUP in a, those guys went down in the tunnel and had a fist fight, and Ashland ends up out ahead in that one.
In a game I picked incorrectly, I'm sure.
then Northwood and wins over Northwood and Tiffin. Now they fell short against Indy in a good ball game, and they couldn't get their offense going against Findlay. And for what I recall, 14-3 kind of game or whatever it
14-3.
was.
Yeah.
But for people who have, but some people haven't really got a chance to see much of this squad. And Tony, I threw on their game the other day, and Cameron Blair, quarterback, who's pictured right there. He might be 6 foot, and reminds me a little bit in the Northern Sun of some of the running quarterbacks I've seen that are, do a little bit of both.
Yep.
And his numbers aren't fantastic in either way, but they're really not that kind of team either that's real high flying. And Chris Maloney, running back, has really come on for them the last few weeks. And I wanted to make mention, Michael Shimmick, their defensive end, number 99, he will probably be up for Defensive Player of the Year nationally. He is that good.
Yep.
And is, he's over, I want to say 15 tackles for loss, and has done it for a second straight season. And so if you're watching that game, watch number 99 on the D line for Ashland. He is a dude.
Yeah, but he's a fun watch. He was all over the place in that Findlay game.
Yeah, so Tony, rush defense, 67 yards a game. Some of this feels like we're unpacking Findlay all over again. And 27 points per game scored, good defense, great rush defense. How do you see Ashland? I mean, there seems like there's a fair amount of similarities when you compare them to another team like a Findlay.
Yeah, sure. And those teams are built to win in their conference, and that's typically what you need to be able to do. And I mean, again, being able to be successful in November and December always starts with being able to stop the run and run the football effectively. So there's no accident here that all the teams that are hosting home games this week all allow less than 100 yards a game on the ground, right? But within the GMAC itself, Findlay and Ashland have shown to be the two teams that kind of year in and year out, that's where they're going to start, is they're going to take away your ability to run the football, and they're going to try and make you be one-dimensional as early in the game as possible. Again, another outfit that when you look at scoring 27 points a game, and what I think Findlay was 25-ish, it takes them a little while to get that lead on you to make you one-dimensional, but they eventually get there, right? So, I think this is another team that, again, is built well in terms of the style of play and wanting to be able to win that trench battle and take advantage of those physical advantages where they can. It's going to be great fun to watch and see how well they pair up to some teams that they're not used to playing. Because we haven't seen any of these GMAC teams, the ones that were former GLIAC, play Northern Sun teams in a lot of years, if ever. Because some, like I say, Ashland, a couple of years, I think they were making the playoffs.
Right.
When the GLIAC and the Northern Sun were still in the same region together. I don't know how often they actually played any of those Northern Sun teams. And even if that was, we're talking about 15 years ago-ish?
I was just going to say, it's been a while.
It's been a while. Yeah.
Yeah. So as we kind of move forward through the other teams, we now move into the back half. These are all going to be free agent teams, road teams, in any certain order. And this is one that we were kind of speaking of a little bit earlier with UMD. And I would say if we take a look at this super region, one of the guys who is probably the biggest stars, frankly, is quarterback Kyle Waljasper for Minnesota Duluth. And a lot of people think, okay, he's just a kind of a bulldozing style runner. I mean, he throws for, over 200 yards a game.
Couple bills a game.
Yeah. And he's got a wide out, Luke Deneke, tall tight end, actually, but wide out. However, he lines up wide most of the time. Tall freshman who, good luck keeping him around after this year.
Yeah,
but,
right.
Has gone for 1,000 yards and has really become a big weapon for them. So not only do you have the run game that they do, where they'll just go ahead and direct snap and go off right tackle, and sweep, Waljasper, but they also can throw the ball. So they have we have them highlighted for both rushing offense and passing offense, because they're one of the few teams in the field that you're going to see with over 200 yards in both areas.
Well, and the totals are identical, which again, if you really ask coaches, balance to them doesn't necessarily mean that you can do the same. It's the fact that you can do either as effectively as the other, particularly when the situation calls for it. But over the course of a year,
come playoff time, right?
That's right. But over the course of a year, when you see teams that are that capable equally, you often see numbers that wind up looking very similar because one week, they're going to go for 350 on the ground, and the next week it's going to be 385 throwing it, and they can do them both adequately well.
Yeah, so I think that this is kind of a point to bring up with Duluth. In the past, when Duluth had won 2 national titles, and what was it, 08 and 10, they were a much different ball club stylistically. They were one that was going to go ahead and run the football almost exclusively, and then decide to be opportunistic throwing it at times.
Yes.
And they had a quarterback back then, Chase Vogler.
Yep.
Who has been their offensive coordinator for about the past 6, 7, 8 years. And just because he played in that style of offense doesn't mean that that's kind of how he wants to orchestrate things. So when you watch them, they will have more trick plays. They are the team most likely to do a fake punt or do something like that. They have a whole lot of color to what they do.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you right now, they get the ball inside the 5-yard line. They are the best team at doing the tush push that I've seen in Division II. They got a big D lineman who goes ahead and lines up right behind Wall Jasper, and they hike it. And they say, "Good luck stopping this momentum," and it's really, really effective. So it's something that I haven't seen that much adopted in D2. So they're a team that sometimes Tony's squads have a hard time stopping, or running their offense when they get that close to the end zone because the field gets so condensed.
Correct. Yeah,
they have their answer.
Shotgun stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they have an answer for that. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But you look at their schedule; they beat both Moorhead and they beat Mankato. Those are kind of the two I would mention the most. I saw them against Sioux Falls, and they absolutely dominated Sioux Falls. That game was 28-0 at half or something like that. And Sioux Falls was not a team that was really that kind of team that you just did that to. And
right.
I was really, really impressed with them. And they can spread things out. I mean, Tony, they were running speed option with Wall Jasper and his halfback, and I just thought, what next?
Yeah, right.
Now defensively, Tony, they're going to take some chances. They're going to blitz a lot. In the same way, we've talked about Western Colorado, the way that they will blitz a lot and sometimes kind of have a lot of things going on with that. And you can take some chances and become unsound at times in doing that. But I think that they're trying to make a play more than they are worry about the other things.
Sure.
And it's an interesting unit to watch. And there's times, though, where they've given up some points, too, a little bit more in the passing game. So, but as we take a look, they're allowing 232 yards per game against the pass. That's because of the fact when you send bodies and if you don't get home, that's a tough deal for you.
Well, and that also gets you have to meter that number a little bit too, because it's not uncommon to see teams that win 9 or 10 games that sometimes they give up a little bit more in passing yards because teams are behind, and that's
right.
They spend most of the second half. That's what they're doing. So, I when it comes to teams that win this many ball games, as long as they're not giving up 3 bills in the past game, I'm usually a little less concerned about that number than I am the rush defense. So,
yeah. So I mean, they've got a lot that they bring to the table here, Tony. In terms of their scoring average is 40 per game, and that's one of those things that I start to look at what is kind of the delta between your scoring average for points offensively and your defensive number. When you're at that number of 20 plus, you're normally in a pretty good spot coming into the postseason.
Yep.
if you're at 15 or less on that delta, that normally means that offensively you're maybe a little bit limited versus the teams that are in this kind of field.
Yep.
Do you have a similar take?
I do, 100%. Normally, you want to see that delta be the tighter the delta is. Obviously, it's that you've had to win a lot more games close. Which that there is a value to that. But what it tends to mean is you're not always as capable of separating as some of the more elite teams tend to be. And so It doesn't mean you can't win, doesn't mean you won't get through the weeks, but it does make it just on its face seem like that might be more of a challenge for a team like that than maybe a team like a Duluth that has consistently created that separation throughout the season.
Well, let's go ahead, Tony, and move on to the next group or the next team that we have on the slate, Minnesota State. And Minnesota State, we kind of talked about a little bit in our intro that the way that they got here was unconventional.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they've had, when you take a look at key wins and you've got like Augustana and Northwest Missouri State, those are two of the better wins that you're going to see these teams have when you go to post something like this and look at these graphics.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they lose to Duluth, they lose to a red hot Wayne team, and they lost to Jack Strand and company of Moorhead. And two of those losses, Tony, came within the last month here. So it's kind of Mankato may be the team right now that I have the most uncertainty of heading into the dance, because it feels like I've seen an upside with what they did to Augustana. And then I've also seen a downside with the way Wayne beat them by 2 scores. And frankly, Moorhead could have very easily won that game by 2 scores. And, they had some key injuries offensively midseason at quarterback and wideout. And I just don't know, Tony, if their passing game has enough come this time of year.
Yeah.
But because I have a feeling, Tony, that they're going to need to be a little bit more explosive offensively, and I'm really not sure that they can be. I've unpacked all that, Tony, but there's also this whole thing that they have. Head coach, last year's run.
Yeah.
Speak to some of that, which cause some uncertainty for us when picking these games.
Well, hey, you and I have talked about this on the GLIAC show and on Sunday night, and there just seems to be this weird thing where every year there's at least one. I see this in the Northern Sun almost every year, whether it was back in the old Super Region 3 days or when the conference was in Super Region 4. It seems like every year there are at least 2 or 3 teams that on the last Saturday of the year drop a game you didn't expect them to or win a game you didn't expect them to. And somebody ends up out of the bracket that was like, geez, oh, Pete's, they had their destiny right in their hands and they didn't close the deal. Or they back in. And it seems like Minnesota State, maybe it's just recency bias in my own head, but it seems like we've seen them back into the playoffs on more than one occasion. And yet somehow you get to the regional final and there they are. So it's like, how can they play so poorly when they're kind of life dependent on it? They get a stay of execution, but then all of a sudden they play like world beaters the next week or the next 2 weeks, the next 3 weeks. So this is that you nailed it, man. There's this certain aura or certain, I don't want to call it a style, but Minnesota State's one of those teams that just seems like always underachieves, at the latter part of the regular season, but then once they get in the bracket, they overachieve. So it's hard to overlook that, even though, again, to use your example from the last couple of teams, that scoring delta of only 17 points, have they been as good at separating? Obviously, they've taken 3 defeats, so they've got a few instances where they were on the wrong side of that equation. Is that going to help them out as they try to move through week to week in this bracket? Boy, I don't know. But again, they've shown that they can do it. And again, it's not the same kids. It's not the same teams they're facing. It's hard to say that really carries over from year to year. It just kind of seems to. I don't know how to explain it.
I know. You know what? I have to give Todd Hoffner, the head coach, a lot of credit.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
He gets them ready to go in the playoffs.
Yep.
And he is a very good in-game coach. Don't be surprised to see them do something where all of a sudden it's 4th and 1, and then you're assuming that they're going right up the gut, and all of a sudden they're throwing the ball to the tight end 20 yards down the field, and it's kind of like they got you.
Yep.
So, yeah, but a very intriguing team. I think with more intriguing teams coming into the playoffs, not with how they got there. We've unpacked that a few times, but now that they are, the fact that they're here, I'm not sure what to expect altogether.
Yeah, exactly. And again, you look at some of the losses they have and you scratch your head, but hey man, they pounded the tar out of Northwest, and I get that was 2-3 months ago, but you can't overlook that. I mean, they've beaten some good teams.
Right. Don't say that to Dykstra. Dykstra will get chirpy in the comments here in a minute.
Yeah, well, let them get chirpy. I mean, that's the numbers are the numbers, man.
And by the way, for those Tony, we're about 30 minutes away from the Super Region 4 podcast. So Tony and I will probably pick up the pace a little bit here. We've already picked the games the other night, so we'll just kind of review those in a moment.
Yeah.
But Tony, as we kind of round out the field here, Truman State, 8-3 club, one of those losses ends up coming to an FCS. But as we go ahead and we kind of walk through, Tony, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, they got nice balance offensively. They give up plenty in their pass defense, that's for sure.
Yep.
They have a nice dual threat quarterback in Dylan Hare that I like. Excuse me, and Denham Cook does a nice job in the running game as well. I just want to point that out. What are some of the things that you think? I mean, I feel like they were probably the last team in the field, and that's not taking anything away from them.
Yeah, it had to be close.
Yeah, and they end up edging out Upper Iowa with a tiebreaker because they frankly handled Upper Iowa. And so how do you look at this squad, and how do you feel about their chances going forward here?
Yeah, no, I view them kind of very similarly to how you do. Again, this is another team where you see that point differential doesn't stretch out quite as well, and part of that's because their defense seems to be a little bit more porous at times, so they had to battle a little bit longer in games to find a way to get that stretch on folks. I agree. Dylan Hare is actually a really nice quarterback. Makes plays both through the air, but is a very capable runner, and it's something that teams are going to have to account for. We've talked about Denham Cook on Inside D2 Football, I think, a few times over the course of the season because he's had a couple of big games for them. I think maybe that's one thing I'm a little concerned about is sometimes he has really big games, and then the next game he doesn't seem to do as much. And so, that lack of consistency, sometimes that may just be that, hey, in this game we feel like we can exploit somebody in the past, so we don't need him as much. But boy, when you get to this point of the season and you start playing the types of defenses they're going to see, that kind of reliability and predictability in terms of what you're going to get out of these guys, that's something that I think is just we haven't seen enough out of Truman, obviously, and certainly in a playoff environment, but even later into seasons, because we've seen them a couple times over the last handful of years get to a point where it's, hey, you beat Indy and you're in the bracket, and they can't seem to do it. So now they get to play Indy in the bracket. So let's see if they can seem to do it this weekend or not.
I agree, and I think that the fact that Truman has familiarity with Indy probably serves them well in this moment.
Agreed.
And I mean they're going to try and have a get back. So I think that they have all kinds of motivation coming into this. We'll have to kind of see how that goes, and that kind of moves us then to Northwood. As we go ahead and look at them, I don't feel like they were the last team in, and I thought they were probably about essentially on the the sixth team overall when the numbers broke down. Now, Tony, we talked about the GMAC defense, total defense here. Northwood gave up about 303 yards a game. So that's a strong number right there.
It sure is.
Now, on the flip side, the offense is probably below par in regards to what we're putting them up against. A team that is, more of a passing squad than a rushing squad. And, that probably, if I'm going to be frank, that probably bodes well to go play Ferris, because we've seen some teams that have been able to throw on Ferris intermittently.
Yeah. No, and again, like we talked about too, over the last handful of weeks, Ferris has had a hard time stopping the run too. But I will agree with you that if there was anything thematic about Ferris's defense that we saw over the course of the bulk of the season, if there was a leaking factor to them, it was teams that could throw the football. And it wasn't even necessarily always teams that could push the ball downfield. While we saw that with some success, teams that are able to use that as a quasi-run game where it's just quick outs and the ball comes out and it's accurate and it forces Ferris to make tackles, that's a team that can actually give that team fits. We talked about this on both GLIAC Weekly and Inside D2 Football a couple of different times over the last month and a half. I've seen a lot of really good Ferris football teams over the last stretch of years, and this one, their ability to tackle is maybe not quite on par with some of the teams we've seen it from them in the past. So, what Ethan Hamby does and getting the ball out quickly and getting the ball into space as best he can with his backfield and receiver mates, that's going to be what they can try to do to test Ferris, is see if they can make those guys miss on making tackles in space.
Yeah, and so Northwood, they've got a win over Saginaw Valley and Tiffin. Losses coming to Ashland and Findlay. This is not a long distance for them to go or any of that kind of stuff. And they get to hear about Ferris all the time. So, this is one of those things where I'll be interested to see, how they step up in this moment. But certainly no one is jealous of them getting a chance to go and play the defending champs. That's for sure.
No, that's probably true. And the unfortunate thing for Northwood is that's strictly a function of geography, because I'm with you. I don't know that they were necessarily on the 8 line, but they're going to get treated like they were simply because they're only 70 miles away. So, it's what it is. We know what the rules were going in. We knew this was probably a likely outcome, and we're going to get it. So, but yeah, it's been a few years since we've seen these two teams tangle. Northwood was one of the last teams to depart the GLIAC for the GMAC. And it's just funny to sit here and talk about this region. And Northwood used to be in the GLIAC.
Yes.
Findlay used to be in the GLIAC. Ashland used to be in the GLIAC. Folks who are old like me remember when Indianapolis, even though they're a founding member of the GLVC, there was a time not so long ago that the GLVC didn't have football, and Indianapolis was an associate member of the GLIAC. And back in the 90s, that was the Midwest Intercollegiate Football Conference, or the MIFC. So, yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of Indy football over the stretch of years, and, so 4 teams that used to be in the GLIAC are in this bracket right now.
And you know what, Tony, if we're talking about Northwood here a moment ago and Truman a moment before that, these are 2 clubs that if you would have told them a week ago they're in the field, they would have been through the roof, because they were not.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
They were at 9-10 coming into the final week.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll just take the fact that they're playing in this game and take their chances with how they do.
Yeah.
Now, Tony, there were a few squads, that went ahead and didn't make the list that were kind of on that doorstep. And, we just showing this graphic because I want to look at KPI on the far extended right side. The third column from the end is the actual KPI number, and they're being sorted that way. Tony, the first 7 teams based on KPI right there all made the field.
Yep.
You want to know how important KPI is? Look no further. The only reason they didn't all go in exact order and with the 8th is because of the fact that you have Upper Iowa, who had the tiebreaker, lost to Truman, who's the next one in line.
Yep, and we've seen that and had that talked about repeatedly. So everybody, the default mindset, right, is to think this is a math problem like it is in the NFL, where head-to-head absolutely makes a difference. It can make a difference. It can make a difference in
if you're really
D2.
close.
but only if you're basically right next to each other. So this is an instance where I think we saw that. I think Truman is in the bracket because Truman and Upper Iowa finished 8-9 and head-to-head carried them over.
Yeah, and Tony, when we take a look at this, the thing I heard the most about, and the thing I saw the most on socials was about Minnesota State Moorhead. And you take a look at their KPI is 112, certainly a distance from the group that we're talking about right now, and especially a long shot from Mankato, who was at 201, that they were kind of chasing for that spot. The thought would be that, maybe if they got in the conversation close enough that with a head-to-head win and an exact same 8-3 record, they just beat Mankato on their field, that they could make it on in with Jack Strand and company. But, the way that this is done here, and I can understand that completely from a common sense approach. But at the same time, we can't really just go ahead and say, we're going to base it off this one game here and kind of ignore the rest of your resume. And, I'm going to play a quick, about 90-second bit here from their head coach, Steve Lockway, who was interviewed today, Tony, about this exact topic. And we'll go ahead and watch a little bit of this, and we'll come right back.
Won the game Saturday, Mankato, dominated the game, and got left out of the selection for the Division II tournament. Steve Lockway joins us here. I don't even know. There's no manual for how to address your team. So I'll just ask you, what was that like Sunday evening when you found out you were not in the tournament?
Well, it was a punch in the gut, right? You drive home on the bus and you look and you see that the 6 team, the 7 team, the 8 team in the region all lost. The 6 being Mankato, and they lost at home to us. And you start looking around and you start comparing and you start looking and saying, well, you got to get 2 teams from the NSIC.
Yep.
And so you're looking at that second team going, us, Mankato, Augie, and you go, well, Augie's lost the last 2 weeks. They just got thumped by 30 to Mankato, and they were 8. They lose. There's no way they can stay in it. And Mankato's 6, and we just went there and in a playoff type game where if they lose, you feel like they're out, and you win, and you kind of convince yourself, hey, we got a shot to get this thing called, and we had to have a lot of things go right for us, and they did. And so it gave us hope, but it didn't happen, and so it's hard. It's the first time I've had to experience, an end of season. If you lose a game and that's it, you kind of know on the field. If you're going into a game and we're not playing anymore, it's the end. Yep. This is the first time that you leave that field. You don't know that the end is there, and so I experienced for the first time the end of season in my kitchen with my laptop, seeing that we didn't get selected, and that's the end. And so that was a different experience. I think that was a different experience for our players, and being able to handle that. And so the sad part is it taints what a really great day the day before was, but that is what it is. And you know what, that is college football. I tell myself that's college football.
I thought that was a very interesting piece. Tony, we had gone ahead a few weeks ago. You and I had watched on GLIAC Weekly, Coach Wooster talking about some of the challenges of kind of end of the year and everything that can come with that and some of the emotions with it. Yeah. And, Coach Lockway, very candid right there. And kind of saying, look, if you're a head coach and you're maybe not looking at all these numbers in the nerdy way that we do, let's be really honest.
Yeah.
You can understand where you're going, well, if this happened and this happened, why aren't we in?
Yeah.
And from a common sense approach, I can't disagree with him at all.
Sure.
It's just, unfortunately, it's just kind of not how the criteria is out there. Does this make it so that maybe you think about some of those things? Well, I don't know if that's the direction this is heading, if we're going to go completely by computers going forward.
Right. Right. Yeah. And part of me doesn't want that too, but for Coach Lockway to be that honest in that interview too, I give him credit for, kind of bearing his soul a little bit. And, and you talked about, Coach Wooster kind of doing the same thing with how things had been in his building after a couple of rough weeks and how they felt like they were in a bad spot. I think, when you look at how the numbers shake out, I've had a lot of people asking me, okay, well, what would it take for Grand Valley to get in? And I'm like, that ship has sailed. And the funny thing is if you really stop and look at it, if you look at these numbers, even if they had beaten, say, Saginaw, let's say they had found a way to scratch that win out. I don't know if they're 8-2. I don't know that they're in. Even if you look at where their strength of schedule number is, yeah, they're versus 500 would have been a little bit better. Their KPI would have jumped up a little bit.
They're similar to Augustana.
Yeah, they would have been in a very similar boat with one less Division II victory, and so their win percentage would have been lower. And it's like, I don't even know if they'd have found a way to win that game if they'd have gotten in. So then at that point, it's like, okay, if they'd have beaten Ferris and you've been able to be on a path to get the GLIAC auto bid and had what could be argued as the best win of anybody in the country going in, that would have been their better path.
No doubt.
Again, as sitting at 8-2. They would have been very, very dicey given the low strength of schedule that they wound up having. And I think this is another thing, too, that we should expound on a little bit more. We don't have to do it here not so much, but people think of strength of schedule as if it's this thing where it's like, oh, well, they didn't go out and schedule good teams. Well, that's not how that works. Everything is encapsulated within this season.
Right.
And so when you have teams that overperform, versus what you're maybe used to, your strength of schedule can go up. And sometimes when you have teams that you play that you used to being pretty decent and they underperform, it tanks your strength of schedule. It isn't because you didn't go work hard to try and get good teams to play. Right. But, Chuck was talking about Lockhaven the other day. There were a lot of PSAC teams that were pretty damn thankful that Lockhaven had a good season because they're not used to getting that in their playoff resume.
Right.
So, I mean, it happens every year where you see sometimes, you have a team that you think is perennially a 6-5, 7-4 type of team, and they throw a 3-8 in there, and then your strength of schedule is not as good. It's not anything that you had any control over, but you still got stuck with it.
Yeah. And it just kind of is what it is with that. So,
yeah. And you probably see that a lot in the Northern Sun, too, just from the standpoint of you don't play everybody. It's not a full round robin. So You're going to get some years where you play a tougher schedule or you have teams on your schedule that overperform, and some years you underperform. You didn't do anything different, but you could have a 475 one year and a 530 the next, and you didn't have anything to do really with it.
No question about it. Well, Tony, you and I, we've got about 10 minutes left. We're going to wrap on up, and I know that we've already have our picks out on Sunday evening for those who tuned in with that audience. But we're going to go ahead and, we won't take a long time with this because we've already unpacked the teams. But, Tony, Northwood at Ferris. I think this is just probably one of the more that you and I feel Ferris is just a clear-cut favorite in this contest.
Yeah, for sure. If Northwood wants to have a chance in this game, they need a couple of things to happen. Number one, they've got to be highly efficient on offense. They need to score almost every time that they have the football, and in part because they need to limit the number of possessions both teams have. They need to possess the ball as long as they can, and they need to make possessions become a premium for Ferris. And then they need Ferris to put the ball on the deck a few times. And so if Northwood could keep the possession count in that 8 to 10 for both teams, and Northwood can be efficient and score the football a few different times and find a way to generate a couple turnovers, that's their best shot to stay in this game. Otherwise, if Ferris comes in and dialed in playoff mode, this could be a long day for the Timberwolves.
I fully agree. Looking at our next game, Minnesota State, Findlay. Tony, I went ahead on our show the other night, and I've kind of had some second guessing since then. The more I've dug into things, But you know what? We have to make the picks, 90 minutes after the pairings are released, and we're just trying to get ready for the show. But Findlay to me feels like they could stylistically be a tough matchup for Mankato, with Findlay allowing roughly 60 yards on the ground per game, and Mankato, unless they change their the Zebras going to change their stripes, they're going to come on in trying to do +1 run game and not be afraid to run the quarterback 20 plus times in this contest to go ahead and see if they can win the game. Coach Hoffner and his ability to find a way to win games like this in the playoffs is what's immediately making me second guess my pick. I'm staying with Findlay, but I'm now kind of uncomfortable with it, but that's who I'm going. Tony, I can't recall perfectly. Who did you take on Sunday evening?
Yeah, I took both Northern Sun teams over their two GMAC opponents. So I had the Mavericks here, and I had UMD against Ashland. And I think, we could kind of talk about both of these games because in my mind, there's some similarities to them.
There's great similarities.
In that, I think all four of these teams are built very well in the trenches. But I also think that both of the Northern Sun teams have shown a proclivity to be that next level of explosive. Maybe not every series, maybe not every down, but just over the course of 60 minutes, they've shown the ability to be far more explosive on offense. And I think that ability gives them a couple of advantages. Number one, if they get behind, they can come back. Number two, if they get a lead, I don't know that I've seen enough out of Findlay or Ashland against the upper echelon of opponents.
That's fair.
To say, man, if they get down 17 points, can they come back? I don't know if that's necessarily where if we see either of those Northern Sun teams get a 2 or 3 score lead in either of these games, especially if it's third quarter or later, boy, things could get real dicey for Findlay and Ashland in a hurry.
Absolutely. Next game up, Truman is going to play at Indy here. Fairly large difference there in the scoring as we take a look at it there.
Yeah.
I have Indy here. I just feel like this is kind of their time to show out in the playoffs, whatever that's going to mean. I just feel like they have a better fate this time around.
I think so too. I think for me, I need Indianapolis to come into this game angry that they have to play because Truman's going to come in and say, hey, this is somebody we know what it takes to play these guys close. We may not get over the hump on them all that often, but we know how to keep this tight, and they got to beat us twice in the same season, and that's always a dicey proposition. So if Indy comes out and plays angry and just treats this as, hey, we don't care that we've seen these guys 8 times in the last 8 years or 7 years or whatever it is, they go out and handle it. I think Indy, is far more explosive and has the most capability. I just don't want them looking ahead to say, hey, we want to prove something to the rest of the region. And we don't get a chance to do it by having to play a conference opponent to still open things up. Sure.
And as we take a look, I think one of the best games in the first round.
I do too.
One of the top 3 probably. And if I'm not mistaken, our guy Chuck Bittner was talking to me earlier today that there was a real chance that he was going to try and head on over to this game.
Nice.
I don't know how long a drive that is from where he's at, west of Philadelphia, going on over to Ashland. But
that's got to be a good 6 hours, I would think.
I was going to say it's bordering on manageable travel.
Yeah.
But you know what? Our guy Chuck is a real trooper like that. And now I think the things that stand out here is offensive points per game in this specific contest. And it makes you wonder about this, but I just feel like Duluth just has a little bit higher ceiling. And, in games like this, if I have any uncertainty, I like to go with the team that I feel, frankly, is stronger at the quarterback position. And Kyle Walljasper is one of the best in Division II. All-American. And I'm going to go ahead and favor them here. And I think that they're going to have a little distaste for the fact that they didn't get a home game also.
You're basically taking every thought that I had about this game and stealing it from me. So, again, I think Duluth's going to play angry because they thought they should have been at home. And I agree with you. I think the quarterback play, Duluth, let's face it, if you really stop and look at it, there aren't going to be a lot of teams that they run into anywhere in the 4 brackets where they're not going to have that as an advantage. And I think they definitely have it here. And that's, certainly no disrespect to Mr. Blair and what he's done throughout the year for Ashland. But at the same time, we've been talking about Walljasper and his feats, kind of like Gavin Sukup seems like for about, a dozen or so years. So
right.
When you get a guy who's that prolific and that experienced, boy, it is a big advantage when you start getting into this time of the year.
No doubt about it. And I don't disagree. Darryl mentions here, the running back from Ashland has been coming on for them. Duluth, I feel like, is a team that can stop the run and get after you up front. I don't know if Ashland throws the ball well enough to make them pay for that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm going with that.
Having a freshman at running back doesn't bother me so much. Having maybe a freshman at quarterback, that is where I would be.
Right.
So.
And before we get off air, Dykstra has got on here ESPN Plus. I have yet to see anything released about where the games are going to be on. It's a fair question, John.
It's funny you say that because I haven't either.
Yeah. So that means that they're just happy they figured out that stuff with YouTube TV and everything else. They haven't gotten on to the rest of the world yet. So, but and I'm going to go ahead and kind of pull all that down because Tony and I are going to wrap up, and guys, will be 5-6 minutes before we go ahead and start up the next one here with my guy AC and John Dykstra for Super Region 4. Tony, greatly appreciate you going ahead. We called an audible. We moved it from Wednesday night to Tuesday. And you know what, buddy? We got it all taken care of. And, well, you and I are going to be off the hook after tonight, buddy. So,
loving it. Loving it.
Well, hey, everybody, thanks much for tuning on in. And for those who are looking for the Super Region 4 show, it'll start up here in about 5-10 minutes. Thank you.